What's up, creature designers? Welcome to another creature design tutorial. This time we're taking it quite slow. I'm going to start my design. With some loose outlines. I've only got one word in mind at this point, and that's the word bulk. So I'm making my creature top heavy by giving him larger shoulders and a forward leaning stance. Made the creature a quadruped, so 2 front limbs, 2 back. Pretty standard design approach. I haven't really got an idea for the final design, so as you'll see we'll evolve this very slightly and come up with a final creature design. So I sketch very loosely. I make marks all over the place, and then I like to go back in with the eraser and remove some of the marks that are not telling part of what I want to show. I'm sure there's many ways of doing this, but this is the way that I kind of like to let my sketches evolve. So with regards to anatomy on this creature, if the creature had such a bulk up front, you could expect there to be a large muscle mass, a large chest cavity, some strong neck muscles, and quite powerful forelimbs. I was in 2 minds whether this was going to be a furry creature or just like a skin texture, and I kind of went with the skin idea. So we're still tidying up the design. I'm trying to imply where I think the muscles would show on the form if this creature was real. As I progress, I make my lines slightly stronger on the ones I'm confident that they're going to remain. So I'm happy with the bulk of the forelimb, rendering the deltoid muscles, the little angular scapular or shoulder blade at the back, implying a little bit of fur on the chest. And I'm thinking a little bit fur on the neck. I've added that because the silhouette itself seemed quite plain in that area, hence the little tentacle type things. Those little spikes on the back gave me the idea, or reminded me of hyenas, so I was just trying out an ear design on this creature, but it didn't really work. You should do your sketches. They may spark more ideas or different directions, and if they don't work at the end of the day, just erase them. So I'm giving some thought to the feet at this point. I was thinking some kind of claw pad type foot, like a lion or a dragon-esque sort of idea. But then with that single toe it made me think of a sloth foot, and that didn't really seem right, so I slapped on a toe on either side as well. Again, experiment, explore. They'll spark ideas as you're drawing. Some will work, some won't, but it's all part of the design process. So we're working on the hind legs. Similar process, starting with a single toe, thinking that that isn't going to work even at this point, because you need to balance your weight on your feet, and your feet need to spread a little bit, so you're likely to have more than 1 toe on the back foot. Just refining the lines here. Sort of faking a bit of 3D perspective by showing the back leg, even though in a realistic pose you probably wouldn't see that as much. Going back in, changing the foot design, making them slightly shorter. Whilst I'm drawing this bit over and over, I'm looking at the head, and it looks a bit passive for a creature of this bulk and in this sort of stance. So I'm thinking I might open the mouth on this design and perhaps change the head position. So here we go, it was bothering me too much. Slap on a toe, leave it alone to think about a little bit, and then move on to the head. So I make a selection, copy it to a new layer, move it to the side, and then I try and work out something drastically different or slightly different to what I've already got to try and change the character slightly. So as you can see, we open the mouth, we add some teeth. The eye now is looking wrong for that sort of pose, and these tentacle-y antennae things are just not working. So I think what I'll do is I'll make the eye look a little bit more aggressive, and I think in the long run we'll change the tentacles for something else. You can make the eye look aggressive by highlighting the brow above the eye, making it slightly darker so that it gives more emphasis and looks like the muscles are tense in that area. So there we go, we get rid of those little antennae and we try some spiky type things. Not sure whether they're for defense or aggression or quite what they're for, but they look cool. So here we go, putting the head back in place, deleting the underlying head from the original sketch. Just testing to see if the overall effect is there, and I think it's working. Looking at it now, I think the perspective of the face is slightly off. Judging by the angle that we're seeing of the hind legs would imply that we should be able to see part of the far tooth, but I think it's just slightly too big. So now that we've changed the character of the creature by redesigning the head, the tail that was down also looked a bit too passive, so just pointing it up to make it look a bit more aggressive. Could use a longer tail here, some spikes, or a shorter tail, more angular. Again, I've duplicated the original sketch now, committing to the design and tidying up. If you've seen me work before, it's a similar process that I follow. I start very vague, I get my general idea down, and even though it's not 100% solidified in my mind, I've got a rough direction that I'm heading in. And if you're in the same boat where you're not sure your final design, just start basic shapes. Try and evolve as you go through. When you get to a point where you think it's looking reasonable, try drastic, like changing the head, changing the pose, adding new features. So you can see here, I'm just using the selection tool and the quick mask to give myself a flat colour. This I use to create my mask, and my mask is used later on when rendering the background. So I picked quite a neutral colour here, and with my layer acting as a clipping mask means I can paint all over the place, and only the pixels from the underlying layer will get coloured on the current layer. It sounds confusing, but it's a really useful tip. So I'm looking at it now thinking, how dark do I want to go? And it's kind of misleading slightly at this point, because with such a white, bright background, it makes your colours look quite dark. So in a moment, or in a few minutes, I change the background to something a little bit more neutral, and then I start working on pushing my colours and contrast. As usual, it doesn't matter what colour you start in. When you work in digital, you have the flexibility to change any colour as you progress. So my colour picker happened to be on a green at this point, and that's kind of the hue that I'm working with. My focus at this point is establishing the lights and the darks. So if the shoulders are quite massive, then there's going to be a large surface area to catch the light, whereas the hind quarters are a lot smaller and they'll be somewhat shaded by the front of the creature. I'm kind of implying that the lighting's coming from behind me to the left over the creature, so left hand side of the screen-ish. So I'm using my sketch here to establish where the boundaries of my light are going to go. So my lines were describing the separation in forms between the muscles and the area around them, and my light is sitting right up against those lines. So I'm reorganizing my layers at this point, trying to give myself a single flat layer with the colours and the lines and the lighting combined. That just allows me to change the background and resize my creature. So you can see by changing that white background to the grey, those lights are really not that bright at all. So it's a process now of going in, refining the lights, adding some form and trying to imply the bulk that this creature's got. So the anatomy I've kept quite simple. The shoulder muscles, I've kind of hinted at there being 3 or 4 muscles that join from the spine at the top of the creature to the shoulder just above the elbow. Those would be used for lifting the leg and pulling it forwards and backwards. The calf muscles and the shins, they're hefty, but they don't offer a lot of mobility or function to the lower leg. So really they're there to support the weight of the creature. Going in with some darks, wherever the form is blocking the light, it's going to be a lot darker. I try to keep the darkest darks away from the face at this point, so that I can concentrate on the overall form. Later on, I'll put more detail and focus on the face by using eye. So I've duplicated my lights. I thought they were light enough, but when I changed it to color dodge mode, it made them a lot brighter, but they don't really look out of place. I'm liking the brightness of the shoulder, but the lighting on the rest of the creature isn't up to par. Introducing a car shadow. Doesn't really need to be too realistic. And I'm using the simple trick of putting a light colour behind a dark area to bring the form forward and add a bit of focus to the image. I'm reinforcing where the viewer is going to be looking by adding a radial gradient, keeping the light centered on the face. This is where the focus is going to be on this creature. So this is where we get in to start defining the face. What I'm trying to think of here is how the muscles would move that jaw and what they would look like if that jaw was open. So I'm putting some lights where the muscles have tensed up and they're bulging, so they're catching more light and looking like they're actually performing or under weight, if that makes sense. So I've made the eye the darkest point on the face, and I'm surrounding it with slightly lighter forms, bearing in mind where the light direction is coming from. The muzzle area could really have been drawn with some of the gums showing slightly. That would imply a snarl sort of action and give a bit more character to the creature. So that's something I think I'll add to my next design. And creature design, the more you draw and the more you design, the more your brain starts to understand what it is you're seeing and the effects that those design choices have. So I'm thinking if the mouth was open, the throat area would be slightly tensed, meaning the tendons would be pulled, and if they're pulled, they're raised slightly, and again they would catch some light. So the overlapping line between the chest and the rear leg, or front right leg, was looking a bit blurry, so I added a bit of rim light to that area just to give a bit of separation. And once I'd done that, I realised that the foreleg shadow was a little bit too dark, so I sampled the colour, painted over a lighter area, resampled the colour so it's a lighter shade, and then went back in on the shadow area. You can see I've ran a dark shadow along the form of the leg. This is the core shadow. This is where light can't pass that far around the limb, so you actually get a shadow or a darker area. Moving on to the next limb, trying to work out how the forearm is constructed. I looked at my own arm at this point and realised that in front of the elbow you have 3 or 4 muscles. You have 2 on the top and 1 or 2 underneath. The 2 on the top, they're used for rotating the arm and flexing the wrist. So I've kind of implied that there's 2 there at the moment, and I've implied that there's 1 at the back. Just reinforcing the light that's on the shoulder, trying to separate the muscles to show that they're holding the weight whilst the creature's got his leg off the floor. I hope, by the way, that this new microphone is a slightly better sound than the previous one. It's only a cheap one off eBay, but my last microphone was terrible. So I used to use different shades to separate the form. The leg that's closest to the viewer is ultimately going to receive a rim light to separate it from the belly, the groin and the back leg. But at the moment I'm still trying to work out some kind of plausible foot arrangement. I felt the light was a bit too strong there, so toned it down. Separated the back of the leg from the shadow by a little bit of rim light. Not very bright in the background, so it doesn't have to be a bright rim light. Again, trying to work out the muscle structure in my head. I know they're going to join the pelvis at the top by the hip area, and that's going to protrude very slightly. I know they're going to join the knee, and in between is going to be a large mass, and when that's flexed it's going to catch the light, so a kind of rounded egg shape would work. Working again on the muscles on the shoulder. When you work in one particular area, your eye gets accustomed to the shades and the tones that you're working in. So it's good to jump around, sampling colours from the image, working in different areas that have different light. So by going between the leg area, which was quite dark, the shoulder that's quite bright, the upper back didn't look like it was blocking the light at all. So a bold step, take a dark colour, pull it on your form, and then try and blend it in. This shows an area that's getting recessed slightly. Working on the arch of the back, trying to make my lines follow the curve of the rib cage, so that even though I'm not rendering the ribs, it kind of implies there's some form there. Messing with the tail. I guess a creature of this bulk probably wouldn't run too fast, but it does look quite speedy, so perhaps a longer tail to help it balance would have looked better. But again, if you try this design, feel free to change whatever you like about it. Zoom in out to get a general picture of the entire creature and realise that the muscles weren't reading as wrapping around the forelimb. So I changed the direction of the light and added a shadow that crosses under the elbow. Adding some lights in dark to the back end. It looks a little bit too muscly now, so I'll blend that slightly in a little bit. Jumping back to the face, realised that the jaw is anchored between the eyes and the throat, So I've put a muscle there that would be tensed if you opened your mouth. Just increasing the darkness of where the creature meets the floor, gives it a bit of believability in reality. Again, I haven't focused on an environment for this creature. I wanted to see where the design would go with the word bulk in mind. My favourite tool, Liquify. I use this to push the background into the form, and that just helps tighten the edges slightly. I also use it to reshape the silhouette of the creature, and what I try to do is to introduce some angles or some form changes. So I pull out a part of the anatomy and then I push it back in from outside to try and give it a flatter edge. So you can see here it just adds a little bit of roundness to the back of that calf muscle, and the lifted foot gets reshaped, adding a few flats gives it a bit of believability. It's also easier than rendering sharp form changes. So reshaping the jaw slightly here and the throat. The forehead needed to be a little bit more angled to imply an aggressive look. It was looking a bit too rounded. So I use auto color at this point, and it's a great tool for really pushing the contrast of your image. You can use the contrast and brightness adjuster, but I find the default tool that Photoshop gives you is more than adequate. So what I'm doing here is pushing the contrast till the lights on the creature are almost too bright. So they're looking slightly washed out at the moment, and that's just on the edge of where I want to be. Again, changing the hue and saturation directly towards the red. So we're getting some greens and some browns. We use the variations technique by duplicating the layer, varying the colour to something opposite what colour you have on the colour wheel. So we had a green, we used the new layer, change that to go more red, and then I delete through one to show the other. Now what I'm doing is, because the creature head has taken on a more red tint, I've put a yellow behind it to give it a bit more separation from the background. A bit more rim lighting again, trying to separate the forms by giving them a sharp contrast between the rim light and the colour of the form. It's good to bear in mind that we're not doing anatomy drawings, so they don't have to be technically correct. As long as it looks believable or functional, usually it's enough to support your overall image. And given that most people only look at your image for 5 to 10 seconds, they're looking for the quick read and not the accuracy of the musculature. But being an artist, it's always fun to try and make them look slightly more believable. That way it keeps your viewer watching your, or looking at your image for longer. So darkening up the nails on the forelimbs, adding a little bit of reflected light, tidying up the shadow where the toe nail touches the floor, and just adding a bit of detail to the foot. So whilst you're working in a dark area, like we said before, other areas of the image will catch your eye. Now, subconsciously, your eye is being bothered by either contrast or the brightness or the shape of it. But if your eye makes you jump up to the chest, go and work on the chest. At the moment, my eye is getting drawn to that bright spot on the foot. I think I change that in a moment. So blending, I've pretty much used the same brush all the way through this image. It's the soft round brush on 80% opacity, pressure sensitive turned on, and size sensitivity turned off. So it gives me a consistently thick line, which I can make stronger or lighter by varying how hard I push on my tablet. And then I frequently sample the area, paint over what I've just done, and then sample again and paint over it a third time. And that gives a suitable blend. So you can see here on the face, sampled the dark, put the dark down, sampled the light, put the light over the top, sampled the middle tone, and then blended the three together. And it works for a quick read. You want to establish the quick reads and then go in with the details towards the end. So I'm just trying to work out some more facial structures here. Tidying up the teeth, although they're looking kind of snake-like at this point. Not a bad thing. Gives me an idea for a new picture. I'm trying to catch the edge of the forms where they're turning from the light here, and giving them the brightest light in the face. This allows the three-dimensionality to come through in a 2D design. Again, using the background colour to cut in on the teeth, just to tidy them up. And like we said before, when you're zoomed out to normal size, the teeth are so small, they just need to imply that they're teeth. You don't need to see every line. Which is just as well, because they're as crooked. So I paused slightly here because I was trying to consider whether to use photo textures and show you how to use those, or whether just to imply texture using light and dark. And I've gone for the more simple approach in this video, partly because it's such a long video, but also because I'm working on a video that shows you how to paint various textures just using hard round and soft round brushes. So if you're not a subscriber, subscribe. It'll be out soon. So I copied and pasted the whatever they are, spiky, flowery, wheat head type thing, thinking it would be a quicker time saver to copy paste and then tidy up, but it didn't turn out to be, so straight in with the brush. Strengthen the lines you like, cut in the edges with the background colour, and then erase into a shape to give it a nice edge. Not really sure the purpose of those, but again, they looked cool, and now that they're there, you can invent a reason. So perhaps they are to help it blend in with foliage and grasses in the environment it lives in. Perhaps they're used as display ornaments, or perhaps they're some kind of sensors like whiskers when this creature is crawling through a cave or pushing through the brush. So again, trying to save time, but in the long run it really doesn't help to take too many shortcuts. So I duplicated it, and now I have to cut in. Now it's the wrong colour, so change it back to normal mode, sample the colour, and just go in with a hard round brush. It's easy to get caught up in these little tricks, thinking that it's going to be quicker to copy and paste and reshape an image or part of an image, when most of the time it's quicker just to redraw, or at least I find it's quicker to redraw. So I'm just blending the neck. I realised at this point that those feathery type things should be cast in shadows, but I forgot those, so you have to imagine it. I hope, by the way, you find these painting demonstrations useful, and that you apply, or you're learning something that you can apply to your own images. If you have done images or indeed YouTube videos, post a link. I'd love to see them. Also, if you have any ideas for creature designs, or an idea for a design based on a word, then let me know and I'll give it my interpretation. So we're just tidying up the edges at this point. We're nearly done. Just scanning the image for bits and pieces that look out of place. Mainly it's where the edge of the creature meets the background, so sample the background and cut into the form with the background colour. Just tidies the edge up. Let me know if you like the length of these videos, or if you prefer the shorter ones. Still noodling at this point. Tidying up the edges. Really don't like the back feet, so trying to hide them by slapping on a bit of scaly texture and knocking back the light slightly so that the viewer's eye is not drawn to that part of the image. So there we go, that's pretty much it. At this point I go back in and put the final touches on the face. These are the sparkles, if you will, for the image, the bits that catch the viewer's attention. And normally if you use sharp edges, they form and believability to the creature. So I'm using reasonably strong darks, reasonably bright lights, right up next to each other. Still the same brush, but this time quite small. Adding some details. Again, they're so small that when you're zoomed out you're not barely going to see them, but there'll be enough detail there for your eye, for it to look interesting to your eye. I think one last tip to this creature is it's very monochromatic, so in a moment you'll see I'll sample a red colour and put that around the nostril and the jaw area, and any red in an image naturally draws your eye. So if I put it in the face of the creature, it's going to draw your eye to the front of the creature. So just brightening the colour in the face by using a light colour on overlay mode, checking the brightness and the contrast, using the dodge tool now to really put some bright whites in the face. In doing so, I kind of smudged the eye a little bit, so you'll see in a moment that that's a happy accident, because when I go back in and repaint the eye, it gets a lot more definition and focus. There we go, painting the eye. Kind of looks quite cool with the cataract type glaze to it. But the little dark pupil really brings that to life in my mind. I felt the light on the nostril was a bit too bright, so knock that back. Adding in a few more sharp lights, cutting into them with some sharp darks, gives it the illusion of some texture or some detail. Still the same brown brush, sampling from the colours that are already there, but applying what we know about light and dark to infer a texture. And here we go with the red that I was talking about. Very lightly laid on, sampled and integrated into the colours around it. And when we zoom out in a moment, you'll see it just adds a little bit to the face to keep your eye in that area. Well, that's pretty much it. Here's the final image. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to rate, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Cheers now. Bye.